What's up, everybody? Welcome to a very special episode of Visual Effects Artists React. We are joined here on the couch by Paul Debevec. You've seen HDRs lighting a scene. You know, if you may have seen the light stage, when you've seen like actors getting their faces captured, this man invented that. It's just an absolute honor to have him on the couch. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thanks. It is so cool to be here.
The reason why this episode is special is because we are going to be looking at some of Paul's tech demos that literally inspire some of the most iconic films in history. So you're going to actually get some real life context as to how this technology evolved into the movies we love today.
It's a lot. We're gonna get into it. Just buckle up. So, Paul, it's an honor to have you on the couch. I feel like, should I be calling you like Professor Debevec, Dr. Debevec?
Dr. Paul.
Paul's totally fine.
It's an honor to me to have you on this couch because you have influenced my career so greatly and my knowledge so greatly because you've communicated things that are complicated in such an effective, approachable way.
Well, it's super exciting to be here. Your videos are super fun. They're doing such great work to get visual effects knowledge out there, to demystify, but also just inspire as to what you can do creatively. And for a period of my career, I was able to, when I was at Berkeley, we do a SIGGRAPH research paper in the fall. And then in the spring, let's make a movie using this new technique that we just came up, whether it was, you know, a photogrammetry system or HDR lighting or the first light stage.
Well, okay, so I think we should probably start by taking a look at the Campanile film that you made. Campanile?
Campanile, yeah.
Campanile.
I worked with a couple architecture students to get this miniature of the Campanile made.
Okay.
I found an undergrad student named Chris Wright who's amazing with this Steadicam shot. And then
Woo!
we tracked the shot.
The match cuts.
What a nice cut right there.
And now we're flying around the tower. So this is from a set of photos taken from the top of the tower of the campus, and then photos taken of the tower, some on the ground, and also working with an architecture professor to do kite aerial photography to get the views above.
Normally you would just fly a drone around, but when you're filming this, like, drones weren't a thing at all. So it was like, how do you get these aerial photos? Kites!
Yeah.
You put a camera on a kite.
The real magic, though, is that, you know, for the first time in this film, we were seeing both a building reconstructed in photogrammetry and its context all around it. And that's when we were getting kind of like a little tingle down the spine that like we've recreated reality. You can believe it. And part of that is the lighting, because the lighting on that scene that you see coming from the scene is consistent with the lighting that you see on the tower, and you just believe that the whole thing belongs together at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of like the unsung hero of the shot is the background. Because, you know, we look at this now and it feels a little unremarkable because we're so used to drones and Google Earth. But back then there were no drones and there was no Google Maps or Google Earth. I mean, photogrammetry was not really a thing. It's like this is the birth of all of that.
So the photogrammetry system that I went on to build at UC Berkeley was designed to do architectural scenes. And one of the things that we built into this photogrammetry system was indeed view-dependent reflection. When you do renderings for the Berkeley Tower, as you rotate around it, the texture maps are actually fading to different original projected views depending on the virtual viewpoint to try to make it look like view-dependent reflection.
I actually didn't realize that specific part of that. That makes it so much more advanced
Yeah.
than what I had thought.
You can keep an eye on the clock to see what you're describing.
Okay.
Absolutely, yep. The clock actually changes time as you see it. So one of the biggest reasons it was helpful to have this relatively photoreal version of the campus is for the match move shots.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what like this shot right here, it goes from this to like a perfect match move. Like the momentum of the camera, it's just so flawless. So like, yeah, I mean, how'd you do that?
Well, fortunately, the architectural model that was built had the same proportions as the real tower, had the same proportions as the CGI tower. So the way that the facade photogrammetric modeling system worked is that you would mark edges in one image and then mark similar edges in another image, similar models in another image, and then you tell the computer what you want to build the scene out of. I want this like a wedge here, a block here, a frustum here. So once we'd locked in the size and shape of the Campanile and how that was built, we could mark edges on the miniature and then lock all of the dimensions of the tower and just solve for a camera position.
I love how brute force and raw all of this is, but also like it speaks to, I think, a philosophy that stands out in your work. I think that's unique to you, which is You didn't have to do a match move transition shot.
Exactly.
Like, this is the technology on display right here. You didn't have to do those match moves, but you did. And it makes it so much more magical.
Well, how do you, I mean, the question is like, how do you make a film that's like worth watching independent of the technology? How do you make it interesting? And I just thought that this idea of having, there's really 3 versions of the Campanile here. There's an architect's model, there's the real tower, and there's the CGI tower. And we do a transition between all of them in the process of that. So the SIGGRAPH 97 Electronic Theater played in the Shrine Auditorium like all week, and one of the people who saw that is a visual effects supervisor who at the time was trying to figure out how to do some shots in a film where all of a sudden time slows down and the camera whips around somebody who's doing something interesting.
And what movie is that? So this is one of the most iconic visual effects shots of all time. Like, pretty universally agreed that this is a very iconic moment.
It's amazing.
It's always like the slow-mo aspect of Neo and the bullets flying by that get all of the buzz, but people take for granted one of the most important aspects of this, which is the background. The background is a 3D scene, but no one realizes that.
It looks so real.
They kind of knew that they had to build a big camera array and that they'd be filming the actors in the studio. And they'd have to put in a virtual version of the background. And that virtual version of the background needed to intercut with stuff that was a couple shots before and a couple shots after that was shot really up there. And it had to match move exactly how they happened to lay out their camera array. And that's when John saw that there was a way to take photos of a scene, turn it into a 3D model that looks pretty much like the scene, and now you have complete camera control, and you can match move that in, and you can do the shot that you need with that background being around those actors and moving exactly the same as the camera array. And if you look at the back of this, there's even a little instance of kind of some view-dependent texture mapping.
So if you look at the back building, there's a reflection on that building. If that was just a texture, as the camera moved, that reflection would be like it's painted on the building. But you can see how the reflection slides underneath like the window slats that are holding it there. It's like an actual reflection. And is that an example of the view-dependent texture?
That is a view-dependent effect you're seeing on those reflections. And it keeps your scene from looking like everything is painted on and chalky. It's not the painted shoebox effect. And in the view-dependent texture mapping chapter of my PhD thesis, that was the idea, is that you would be able to bring more life to your scenes by kind of representing the lusters and the reflections that you see. Amazingly, they completely just reset the clock on time slice. They did the best possible thing you could possibly do with the technology, with an amazing movie, an amazing story, amazing everything. And all of a sudden, it's all new again.
Hey, it's me, Brandy O'Daniel. In this episode of What's Happening in the VFX Industry, we've heard that Paul Debevec has come to the Corridor Digital Studio right here in Los Angeles, and we have the pleasure of going to talk to some people about what they think that means. Come on with me. What would you say if I told you that today's episode is brought to you by Raycon?
Yeah! Probably something like that.
Great. Hey, Dean, with Paul Debevec downstairs, what would you say if I told you that Raycons have 8 hours of playtime with seamless Bluetooth pairing?
Oh, I don't see what that has to do with Paul Debevec, but that sounds really great. That's a lot of playtime.
And they come in a convenient carrying case that you can easily fit in your pocket, and they recharge your earbuds at the same time. Personally, when I'm not reporting on the VFX industry, I like to go for a nice, easy jog. I put in my Raycons, they fit comfortably. The music helps me zen out and focus on the really important things. Hey, Sam, what would you say if I told you that Raycons are half the price of other premium wireless earbuds on the market?
I would say that's impossible.
But it's not. It's actually happening right now on buyraycon.com. If you want to get a pair of Raycons for yourself and get that awesome premium audio experience for half the price of other premium wireless earbuds, head on over to buyraycon.com/corridorcrew and you'll get 15% off your purchase. Hey, Wren.
Hi.
Hey, as a professional VFX, wait, aren't you downstairs right now? How did you get up here?
So if your contribution to photogrammetry and projection mapping and image-based modeling led to the Matrix, well, we're about to jump into HDRs and image-based lighting. HDRs are the secret to making your CGI look real when you're trying to composite it into real-world footage. So one of the really cool things you do is you just go to your spot, wherever you're filming, get a 360 image of that area as an HDR, and you can use it as lighting on your 3D model to make it look like it was lit with what was in that scene. It's used in big movies, it's used in scrappy indie VFX YouTube channels, it's used in video games, it's used all over the place. It is one of the defining things in modern CGI.
It turns out the world has an amazing dynamic range of like from how dark things are to how bright things are. And our eyes have all these adaptation methods so that, we're in a dimly lit room inside, we can see stuff. And if we go outside, then, our irises get smaller, the rhodopsin pumps into the retina, and then we can see outside the bright stuff. But we still can't look directly at the sun, which is still like tens of thousands of times brighter than anything else you would see.
At least they say you can't.
You should not. You should not. Put on the special glasses, please. The cameras aren't designed for that. Cameras are designed to take a picture of you and originally to print it out on photo paper, where everything on the photo paper is going to be between like how reflective something can be when it's white and how reflective it can be when it's black. But if you then want to actually say, I'm recording values of light in the real world, and I want to include how bright that light is and how bright that is, and gosh, even how bright the sun is. It turns out computers are fine with this. It's just software, image rendering software wasn't designed.
So what you're talking about is literally the birth of image-based lighting, which is a very, very common thing that any visual effects artist has dealt with today. Proper overexposed bokeh.
This is one of those things where I saw it was immediately like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I'm seeing those bright highlights that I see in real life. And I'm seeing light act like it does in real life. I'm seeing exposure changes when light is reflected or going through like something that's dim or that filters out the colors. It's like I had never seen this before. Because up to this point, at any point, if you wanted to light something in CGI, you had to place the points by hand or the lights by hand and dial in the values by hand, eyeball it, hope your artistic interpretation is close enough. You're like a classic painter trying to paint the real world and picking like your paints to match the real world values.
Yeah, and so this process of like, hey, let's just measure the light that was there, use physically based rendering to illuminate the CGI object with the light that was there, then it should look like it was there, and we can have fun and make a film where something happened that, maybe not actually occurred.
And this was game changing for me. For the entire industry, this is game changing.
There's also like
this literally changed games.
You got a whole refraction shader going on with the big glass ball too.
Well, thank you ray tracing and thank you Radiance for all the refractions and stuff. But the HDR map, I shot it in the late afternoon in the UC Berkeley Eucalyptus Grove. I shot it on a mirror sphere. So I modeled this scene. I wrote little equations to make the little twirly things there in some procedural language. And I got, I wanted diffuse, I wanted metal, I wanted refraction. I got all the materials that you can do. And you just basically ask Radiance to render it, and it lights that scene with that light, and it looks very real. But on top of that, I wrote a couple of filters that would produce these bloom effects. And then on top of that, I also did a vignetting filter. So when you get out to the corners of the image, it's actually multiplying down by 2 stops by the time you're in the corner of the image. So when you rotate around, look at that bright region go into the corner, and it exposes it down, and you see more detail when that bright spot floats into the corner. And you probably weren't conscious of that the first time you saw the film, but it just feels right because that's how light and optics work in the real world. So, it was nice looking at the spheres in the forest. I got a lot of good feedback on the film. I told it kind of blew up the discussion boards at Industrial Light and Magic after SIGGRAPH 98. And they actually invited me to come speak about it. So I have a photo of my first slide in C Theater with R2-D2 over there before I gave my talk. But, it just felt like, hey, we could probably do more.
Now, this is such a flex in 1999. This is you're just out there in this CG bodybuilding competition, showing off the biggest biceps anybody's ever seen.
Very happy with that shot. We've got monoliths. Obviously, there's some 2001 in this here.
That shot with the motion blur is the most flexiest of all these shots.
So that's it's all of the dynamic simulations, but also seeing the proper high dynamic range streaks of light in the motion blur.
It ended up, I don't think I knew when I started the film that the coolest part about it would be just seeing the reflections whipping across these black monolith surfaces. And that was a total win because Radiance didn't have motion blur built into it. So I had to render every frame. I think for this shot, every frame got rendered over 100 times with just tiny little steps.
Oh, and then you had to go through and bracket. You took all those brackets and merged them together.
Well, they're all at the same exposure, but they're all high dynamic range. All of them have little points of light that go way above the white point, and then we're using that high dynamic range motion blur to average them together still in floating point space. So you don't clip the renders. The renders have the full range, and then when you average them together, you can still get that bright streak. And then there's also what we had to do for the floor, because you notice the floor gets both shadows and reflections, right? And normally, if you have like these image-based models, then they're just going to be, you know, reflecting the same pixel values that you saw in the original photos. But we're putting monoliths on top of the floor. So those monoliths need to cast shadows on the floor. And so, you know, we modeled the floor as a flat polygon, but what we had to do is we had to take it from being an emissive texture to being the correct reflective texture, like a normal texture map, such that if it receives the light that we've reconstructed, it then looks the way that it did in the photos.
So basically had to inverse out the light from
We
it.
had to inverse light. We had to inverse light the floor of St. Peter's so that we could cast shadows on it and we could get the reflections on it. It's all just math. Like light and math, it's all linear. It all works. If you do the math right, you can actually get the light to look right.
It's very nice that it's all linear. It's too bad we screwed it all up in our whole image pipeline with everything not being linear anymore.
Slow progress.
If this isn't nerdy enough for you, we have a less edited version of this where our technical discussions really shine through the roof on this.
If any of you guys hopped over and saw the Tim Miller episode, you know what we're talking about. It's a good episode. It's a special one. So yeah, corridordigital.com.
Is somebody there?
So this is X-Men, which came out in 2000. And tell us a little bit about the connection between this and the work that you were doing.
So I think this is the first shot in a feature film that used HDR lighting techniques directly inspired by the research I was doing. And in this scene, Senator Kelly, who's afflicted with some mutant thing, he melts right in front of Halle Berry's character here. I think this is it, and it's
And now he's transparent. And comped into the real water there.
And just look,
Wow.
the lighting on the CGI water looks so close to the lighting on the real water at the end of the shot.
Well, even this, like the dude has like proper subsurface scattering on his digital skin
And this ends up being a really difficult CGI lighting integration because it needs to do diffuse surfaces and specular surfaces, and both real stuff that's actually on the table lit by that light and CGI versions that also need to look like they're lit by that same light. So everything just kind of has to work.
Let's quickly define specular and subsurface just for the audience.
Absolutely. So when light hits skin, some of it bounces right off the surface. And that's the specular highlights. Like right now I should have like a little specular highlight on my nose and my forehead from these light sources.
It's like the shiny parts.
Yeah, the shiny parts. This is the color of the light source. And then some of the light actually refracts into the skin, bounces around in the bit, most likely gets absorbed and never comes out. But the stuff that does come out has picked up the color of the skin, it's become diffuse, it's moved around a little bit, and it diffuses back out as subsurface scattering. You're showing subsurface scattering all the way through your finger from that bright LED light in the back of your phone.
from the other side.
And lo and behold, it's not the white color of your LED, it's the red color of all that blood that's in your skin.
Oh, the blood.
And what they did is they brought a mirror ball on set and they got different exposures of the ball and they used that to do a reconstruction of the lighting of the scene that was based on the high dynamic range imagery and then simulating it with the HDR lighting for that. And the shot ended up looking pretty good. Once we'd made the Campanile Movie, once we made Fiat Lux, it seemed like we needed to turn our attention to the human face. That at some point I need to be able to make a movie that actually has some people in it, or else we're not really making movies, right?
Yeah.
And I realized, you know what? If I got an image of a face lit from every direction light can come from, one at a time, I can compute from that data what it should look like with an image-based lighting environment. And that was the genesis of the first light stage. It had a single 250 watt spotlight. So if you swing this light around, you get people lit from any lighting direction. And then the goal is we're gonna take this person, we're gonna light them with a lighting environment they've never been to. And we're gonna do it with what we call a reflectance field. It's a data set of every direction light can come from. Sometimes today these are called OLATs because it's one light at a time. Now that we build light stages that have lights in all different directions, we can just have the actors sit there and in less than a second get every single lighting direction. And it's a readout of how your face reflects light. And it has all of the specular response, the diffuse, the subsurface, the self-shadowing, the inner reflections.
So you've now been able to figure out how to like properly relight an actor and whatnot, but they're in like this little stage. How is this accessible for a movie production?
Well, the next thing that we did is we actually used our video projectors to do a 3D scan of the face while they were there. We started projecting putting these relightable textures onto the facial geometry. And we had to do some special work to make those relightable textures view dependent. We had to kind of strip the specular off and then resynthesize it from new normals. And that became like the rest of our SIGGRAPH 2000 paper.
There's a really ingenious solution you had here to get the surface details where you used polarized light, and you took one picture of the face where you had basically polarized out the reflections. You took another picture where you had the reflections, and you just did a difference between the two.
Yep.
And that gave you just the specular then.
Only the specular
Only
reflection.
the specular.
And that's what you're seeing right there.
This is only reflection of the skin.
It turns you into the Tin Man. The next chapter of the story for that is that we got a call from Scott Stockdike at Sony Pictures Imageworks, and they were doing the visual effects for Spider-Man 2.
Right.
They wanted to do a very photoreal Doc Ock that could climb up buildings and be in stunt scenes and look like Alfred Molina and like a real human Alfred Molina. We built a second light stage out of strobe lights that only took 8 seconds to scan, and we got like a massive reflectance field data set of Alfred Molina. They brought Tobey Maguire in for like 3 shots of the film where he's stopping the train. And they built a production pipeline based on our SIGGRAPH 2000 paper to do the relightable textures with diffuse and speckle and all that for the digital humans in Spider-Man 2. And for 2004, that was a pretty darn good digital face that they did, and they won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects.
Hey, heck yeah.
This was a major milestone in being able to reproduce digidoubles.
We actually, at this point, had built a better mousetrap. And that got us Benjamin Button. They brought the entire cast of Avatar over, and our scans were used to kind of morph into the Na'vi versions of the actors. Probably the most kind of impactful project I got to be part of in the movie industry with this was scanning Paul Walker's brothers for Furious 7 to help What a Digital create a digidouble of Paul Walker who had passed during the production.
Amazing.
And doing about 300 shots of that. I just am so excited to see people playing with new technology, but also doing creative things with it. So getting ideas out there, showing that there's a creative application, that there's a creative route to do something new and exciting with it is super important for moving the field forward.
Yeah, I mean,
you guys do that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So this show is special because we have somebody joining us who's helped invent the technology behind our favorite visual effects in movies. What are some other technologies you guys would love to see explored? Not movies for us to look at, but the actual tech behind them. And we will invite in the creators to see what we can teach you about them.
Oh, by the way, we got a cool video coming out tomorrow. We know how much you guys like the debunking videos, and we've got a very cool, spicy one for you about alien orbs. And we've got a very crazy twist at the end of this one. So make sure you're subscribed for that, because if you're not, you might miss it. And that would make me sad.
Okay, so I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface. There's so much more. There's a whole era of shooting in volumes and LED screens and all the technology you've developed around that, but we might have to save that for potentially a later day. Is there anywhere people can go to look at more of your research, to learn more about what you've done?
Yeah, well, I've got a website that's been up since 1994, www.debevec.org. And there's a YouTube channel with all the electronic theater pieces that you can get there.
Yeah, you know what? For me, like, getting to film this episode of React has been special because it's very much a full circle thing for me. It's the research you've done, the way you shared it, the way you shared knowledge really helped me get into the world of visual effects. It helped me get into the world of CGI. And now, you know, a couple decades later, we're actually sitting on the couch with you, getting to talk to you and hear these stories, and it's been just amazing for me. So
thank you. It is a huge honor just walking in that door and saying, "Oh my God, that's the couch." Yeah, and here we are. Thanks so much. This has been awesome.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
I really
this has
appreciate
been,
it.
seriously, I rarely get to have like these types of nerdy technical discussions, so this was like a real treat for me, so thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for everything you do to show people what's possible with visual effects.
Absolutely.
Likewise.
Yeah, for real.